we are continuing our series of State of the Program addresses with all 12 FBS programs in the state of Texas. We have now landed in Central Texas, in Waco, Texas. North Central Texas?
Central Texas.
Central Texas.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Where we will talk about the Baylor Bears here with Dave Campbell's Texas Football College Football Insider, Shehan Jeyarajah. Hello, Shehan.
Hey, long time no see.
I know, it's been a minute. Okay, let's talk about Baylor. A second year now entering under Dave Aranda. I know Bill Connolly, our friend from ESPN, put out started his Big 12 piece, and he referred to last year as year zero for Dave Aranda. I think that's an apt way of describing it, considering gestures broadly. So it's probably the toughest question to ask, but what is the state of the program at Baylor right now?
Yeah, so I think that 2020 was an interesting year for a lot of reasons. I think primarily, the staff change, of course, has to be a big part of it. The player attrition after the 2019 season, right? This was not the same team that took the field in 2019 for a lot of reasons. And I think that the other thing that you say is that this is a team that I think struggled without having spring camp in 2020 as much as any team in the country did. And a big part of the reason for that, not to get too much into it, but on their offensive staff, Dave Aranda really tried to replicate what they had done at LSU on offense. They tried to bring in, a seasoned offensive coordinator in Larry Fedora, kind of mix it with some passing game coordination from George Munoz. And that takes a lot of chemistry. Like, I think that we look at what happened with Joe Brady at LSU in 2019 and think, oh, well, they just want to do that again. Well, most teams can't do that. That's just not realistic in a lot of cases. And I think that Dave Aranda realized that. He went and fixed the problem. He brought in, obviously, a new offensive coordinator in Jeff Grimes, a new offensive line coach in Eric Mateos, a new wide receivers coach in Chancey Stuckey, and also a new cornerbacks coach as well after his cornerbacks coach left to become a defense coordinator. And so this is, I think that the state of the program right now is to be determined. They're kind of in the middle of something, I think. Now, the thing that I will say is that what making these decisions tells me more than anything is that Dave Aranda is evaluating. He is trying to look at it. He's not married to anything. He's not a little too stuck in his ways, a little too stubborn. He's willing to try things. And so I think that they're on the early part of a growth. I think they're heading in the right direction, but it's going to be a process.
So in a lot of ways, if you're taking 2020 as a starting point for Baylor, which is basically the only data point we have to go off of on the Dave Aranda era, I think it's fair to say that the defense was,
very good, I thought.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah, very good.
And the offense was a disaster.
Awful.
It was very bad. And so I guess let's start with how fixing the offense.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Grimes comes in, and of course he ran the BYU offense, which was one of the very best in the nation. Depending on who you ask, it may have been the best in the nation. They bring him in as the offensive coordinator. So what's this offense going to look like, especially with a personnel that is undergoing a lot of turnover, replacing 4 offensive linemen, replacing a quarterback? What do you think this Baylor offense is going to look like?
Yeah, so first of all, I have a piece up at TexasFootball.com that I published before I went on vacation that you should definitely check out. So the biggest thing that they say is that they are going to have an identity in a way that they just never did last season. And so what that's going to be built around is they're going to be a wide zone offense. That's what Jeff Grimes ran at BYU to great success. And what that means is they're going to be kind of a stretch running game. That's what everything is built around. And one thing that they told me a lot was that almost every play is going to look the same on the offensive line. They're going to block the same wide zone system, whether it's a run, whether it's a pass, and they're just going to attach things to it. That's really what it comes down to, is that it's going to be pretty simple. The system itself, wide zone isn't an easy system to run as an offensive lineman, but it is going to be, you need to be decisive, you need to be trained, you need to, kind of be able to execute it at a very high level. That's what it's going to be built around more than anything. And so I wish that I had the phrase in front of me that he said, but basically it's, We run a few plays in a lot of different ways, with as much misdirection as any team in the country. I think that's actually the exact quote. And so what that means, that's a whole lot of words. Yeah. But what it means is that a lot of these plays are going to be built out of the same look. But it's just going to, again, be concepts attached. It's going to be, the receiver's going to run this, but it's still in the middle going to be the same, right? It's going to be the same type of play. And so basically the idea is, man, we only have a couple of practices with these guys. We only have a couple of years with these guys. We want to give them something that they can digest and adjust to. and then build around it and kind of have, again, you can do whatever with the receivers. It doesn't really matter. You can do whatever with the running backs. It doesn't really matter. But on the offensive line, this is our direct identity. And so that's what they want more than anything is to be able to be sort of a stretch run team, to be able to get to the outside and be able to be decisive in a way that we really never saw last season.
All right. I'm gonna give you. I hate these questions, but I know that people in radio do it all the time to me on interviews, and so I finally get to reverse the whip on somebody.
All right.
What is the bigger concern for the Baylor offense? The offensive line or the quarterback?
Oh, it has to be offensive line. I think that even dating back to 2017, Matt Rule's first season in Waco, I don't think that this has been a unit that has developed the way that you needed them to. And so, there's been so much talk about Charlie Brewer last season, but listen, the way that they blocked last season was a huge issue. And talking to Dave Aranda, again, this is in the article at TexasFootball.com, he said that one of the hardest things to do right now is to drop back pass and block inside zone. And they tried to do both those things a lot last season. And so they're trying to go the opposite of that, is basically what it comes down to. But look, it doesn't matter who you have at quarterback. And there are 4 guys that are very much in that quarterback competition, and Gary Bohannon, Jacob Zeno, Blake Shapen, and Kyron Jones. But it doesn't matter who's going to start. What their skill set is if you can't keep them healthy, if you can't keep the game in front of them. And so I will say, this system also does emphasize, look, we are going to bootleg our quarterback. We are going to get guys on the run. We are going to zone read, stuff like that. That's a big part of it. But if they can't execute at a high enough level, it really doesn't matter what else they do. If they can't block for the running backs, they can't block for the quarterbacks. And they've really tried to address that position in a big way. They added some transfers. Jacob Gall was the top-rated left guard in America, according to Pro Football Focus last year, but he might play center at Baylor in this wide zone scheme. They added a transfer from Vanderbilt, Grant Miller, who played center and might actually play guard at Baylor. They have a guy in Connor Galvin who they're very high on and has been a tremendous left tackle for them for a couple of years, so that position I think is kind of locked down. And they have some other young guys coming in there that they're pretty optimistic about, and they still might take more transfers. So they're trying to rebuild this on the fly because they know that nothing's going to change unless that changes.
Doing the Baylor State of the Program address here with Shehan Jeyarajah here on Texas Football Today. Get involved in the conversation, #TF Today. Let's now go over to the defense, where there's probably nicer things to talk about at least, or at least more positive things from 2020 to talk about. I think that the linebackers for Baylor, is it overstating to say it could be the best linebacker core in the Big 12? I mean, I think Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie are awesome, and could be the. Is it fair to say it's not fair to put that question to you? Is it fair to say that is the strength not just of the defense but of maybe the entire team?
Well, I will say it depends on how you classify Jalen Petrie.
Oh, here we go.
They do sort of classify him as a defensive back, but I think that. Here's what I'll say about Baylor, is that I think that they have 3 of the best defensive players in the state of Texas. And Terrell Bernard at linebacker, Jalen Petrie at that star position, which sometimes lines up at DB, sometimes lines up at linebacker, and Raleigh Tejada at cornerback. I mean, that's as good a threesome as I think you're going to find. And they're also very optimistic. The weak part of this defense last year was the defensive line. They've added a transfer at nose tackle named Siaki Ika from LSU, and he is just not the kind of player that you usually get at Baylor University. He is big. He's like 330 pounds and disruptive, right? You just don't get that. He's not a gap filler. And so I think that when you have those 4 guys, that's a great base. And you do return 10 starters on the defensive side of the ball. Now, again, it is going to come down, I think, in a lot of ways to that defensive line, whether they're able to get pass rush with their defensive ends. But, they have the pieces in place, I think, to be one of the best defenses in the Big 12 and in the state of Texas, and even nationally, just with the production that they return. Even you look at safety, right? Like, you've got guys in JT Woods and Christian Morgan who have been there for years at this point. A lot of production, a lot of experience from that group. And that linebacker, too. Petrie sometimes lines up in that role. Terrell Bernard, obviously, down there, too. And Dylan Doyle really showed some flashes at times last year too. So this is a unit that I think top to bottom is as complete as any group in the Big 12 and in the country. And like you mentioned, if Terrell Bernard stays healthy, Jalen Petrie I think is the X factor of this defense, being able to line up anywhere on the field. Could be a really good unit.
So I asked this to Jeremy Clark of Horned Frog Blitz last week about TCU, and I'll ask you the same question. Who's the guy that could be the breakout star of this team? Who's the guy that could be the one is like, man, we should have seen this coming. It ends up he's one of their very best players.
Yeah, I think that for people in the know, Siaki Ika is a guy that we almost expect this from at this point. But this is going to be the guy that I think by the end of the year everybody's talking about in the Big 12. Like, talking to some of their staffers, like, they were like, man, this guy's going to be first team all Big 12. Like, this guy is going to be one of the best players in the Big 12 on the defensive side of the ball. And like I mentioned, I mean, he is huge. He was I believe, like, borderline top 100 kid coming out of high school. Very disruptive for LSU, just kind of, it wasn't the best situation for him, so he decided to come and rejoin his old defense coordinator, Dave Aranda, at Baylor. And he is just a center point, right? Like I mentioned, their defensive line was really the issue last season in a lot of ways. And when you have that presence in the middle, like, Baylor fans will remember Andrew Billings, right? Andrew Billings is a total game changer at nose tackle. Well, when you have a guy like that, it makes things so much easier for all the defensive linemen, for the defensive ends. And obviously with Baylor, too, and the way that Dave Aranda plays his system, it means that Terrell Bernard and Jalen Petrie are going to be able to get after the quarterback, too. So he's the guy that I think has the potential to take this Baylor defense from being very good, which it was last year, it was very good, to potentially being an elite unit.
So I think it's fair to say, okay, unless they go 0-12 or some sort of external thing happens, Dave Aranda's not getting fired. Okay, just hold it. So he's not on the hot seat or anything like that. Especially coming off of what was such a strange 2020. So they go 2-7 last year. We actually have a 12-game schedule, which is super cool and like a nice change of pace here.
How about that?
I don't want to pin a win total on you, but what would in your opinion would signify success in 2021, a successful year for Baylor?
Yeah, I think it's making a bowl game. Look, last year, like you mentioned, is a weird year, and especially with Baylor and Texas Tech, I feel like I come back to this, right? Like, you lose 3 non-conference games. Baylor lost 3, Texas Tech lost 2. And if Baylor wins 3 non-conference games, which you expect them to do this year, it's a 5-7 year, which does not feel the same as 2-7, right? And so this year, I think that I'm looking at it more from, okay, you went 5-7 almost last season. Not that they did, but that it feels like that. So I need to see more than that this year. I need to see progress from that this year. And you do have a very young offense. That's a huge part of it. You have a new quarterback coming in. You've got a new offensive system. You still are trying to figure out that offensive line. But I think that for Baylor, I think that they are at a point as a program to where if you do not make a bowl game, that is a disappointing season one way or another. Even in a down year, even in a bad year, you should be expecting to be in a bowl game. I think that's where Baylor's at this point.
And I will just say, to kind of close it out, the schedule sets up that if you're going to have a young offense, which they are, with a lot of new pieces, you open at Texas State, Texas Southern, at Kansas, okay? Your first real test, all due respect to our Bobcat friends and our Tigers friends, your first real test doesn't come until September 25th. Now that's Iowa State. Yeah. And you like one of the final exams comes in the 4th game of the year, but you do have some time to build up and get some real game reps there. In games that you should be favored in.
Yeah, and I look at that Iowa State game. It's such an interesting matchup to me because back in 2019, for people who remember that season from Baylor, right? Like, Baylor goes and they go up, I think it was 20-0. Iowa State comes back, goes up 21-, and they win at the last second on a field goal, right? And that ended up portending great things for that season. They ended up winning 11 games and all that sort of stuff, right? Baylor did. And so I don't expect by any means for Baylor to beat Iowa State. There's no reason that they should, right? But I think that we're going to learn a lot about how competitive this team is going to be in that game. It is a game at home. It is the first conference, they play Kansas, but the first real conference game for Baylor at home. Are they able to be that level of competitive? Are they able to take it down to the wire? Are they able to make it a game in the 4th quarter, or do they get blasted? Because that's certainly in consideration too. And so I think that we're going to learn coming off of that game whether this team has the upside to be super competitive in the Big 12, even if they don't win. I'm not saying that being super competitive means winning 9 games, but if they're able to be competitive in every game and win 6 games and make a bowl game, I think you have to feel very good about this team.
I think you're spot on. That that Iowa State, they should be 3-0. If there's not 3-0 going into that game, they got bigger issues. But they should go. And I don't know what Iowa State's schedule look like. They may be undefeated as well.
They play Iowa.
They're not gonna. They should beat Iowa.
Well, that's literally every year.
El Asico, yeah. But I will say that with that Iowa State game, if they come out and they lose 34-27, I think you're like, okay. Yeah. Obviously didn't get a win, but things are moving in the right direction. But they come out and they get blasted like 42-3. Right. Then it's like, you wonder where the progress is coming with Baylor. He's Shehan Jeyarajah. He's our college football insider here at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Follow him on Twitter at Shehan Jeyarajah, spelled exactly as it sounds. Thanks.